just so you know, we are committed to our lakes here in the city. You know, we were talking about earlier, we put $20 million, I initiated, I was first mayor of George Russell, $20 million on Route 20, which is supposed to alleviate some of the problems down here. I know the city manager, I think, has put some money in for ARPA for the Green Island neighborhood, which is supposed to relieve the rest of the system again, which will be included here too. And so a few years ago, Jackie Burmeister right here, she's in charge of the lake, something I initially was Blue Space. She's a wonderful addition. We got her an assistant in last year's this year's budget. And the process here is going to be transparent. That's why I really want to emphasize that if you saw the reports on the agenda, about 2 or 3 city council meetings ago, there was a great report, very transparent, and we're going to be transparent as much as possible going forward. 100% transparency on this, because we're all in this together. We all make sure this doesn't happen again. And Jackie's got some speak later on. She did some updates, positive updates on the impact of the lake, and I thank God it was not during the summer. So this happened during the winter. Was the only good point about this. So, but with that, Candy's been running the show here on this. She's been taking one of the leads, and this one to city council.
Thank you, Joe. So just really wanted to say that, you know, what happened here was really devastating to everybody who lives here. But do also, I mean, right away, the mayor, the manager, the commissioner of DPW, along with Councilor Russell, everybody was on top of this the best that we could with the situation that took place. You know, the good news is for this is that, you know, we have a commissioner who he'll talk to you about what's going to take place going forward, and some of the things that took place and what DPW has done since then. Senator Michael Moore has been on top of this. You know, we talked about how is it that we were going to get together with the people who actually live down here and on the lake. So we just wanted to make sure that we brought as much as we possibly could to you tonight. And the commissioner will certainly go through the reports of what he has. I know there's a ton of questions over the Route 20 piece that took place back in 2015, the monies that were spent. Again, Senator Moore and the commissioner, who at the time wasn't here, but he has a very good handle on what took place on rerouting some of this that comes into the lake. So I hope that we can all get answers in terms of how do we make sure that this doesn't happen again. I know there was a ton of questions that I had got. Why is this pumping station here? Those are the questions that I put to the commissioner, which he'll go over why that pumping station is there. What can we do going forward? You know, is it possible? Can we move it? Is there less to come into this pumping station? So those are a lot of the questions that I know the commissioner will be talking about. Just really want to say thank you to great showing for this meeting, and want to say thank you to Jackie, because I know Jackie, it was the last minute for her that we asked her to come here, because some of the questions were also on some of the weeds and algae in the lake and what kinds of impact that it has. So back to you, Senator Moore.
Thank you. Just as an introduction, so we have from DEP, Mary June Pigsley. She's in the back. So if there's any questions we need answered from the Department of Environmental Protection, we have them here. And we also have Todd Richards, who's the Assistant Director of Fisheries from the Department of Fish and Game. So he's also here. So just quickly, Councilor Carlson and the mayor have referred to it. I'm thinking back 13 years ago when I first got elected. We used to hear about these 100-year storms that were hitting and we kept having the sewer overflow that kept going into the city. Well, I think it was 6 years ago? 6 years ago, 8 years ago, there was roughly $20 million spent on Route 20. Because at that point, the sewer that should have been going from, everyone knows where, what's the restaurant there? Pub 99? The sewer that should have been going from Pub 99 and up Route 20 was actually coming along Lake Ave, up and going through the city by the lake. So that was because of the capacity issue, the sewer, the septic was going into the lake. So at that point, the state came up with 10 million, the city came up with 10 million, and we rerouted the septic from coming up this direction to going directly from that point, from the Shrewsbury line, directly to the upper Blackstone. And there were 2 pumping stations that were also upgraded at that point. So I'll let Christian Fink talk about that. And then there was recently, the city also spent another $10 million on another pumping station. So there has been work going on to try to alleviate this issue. So that's just a little background on what has been done already. So, Mayor, who do you want to? So, okay, I'm going to give you the Commissioner, Jay Fink.
Thank you. If I put this down, can you hear me on this?
Yep.
Okay,
Well,
thank you.
That's actually for one individual. Can you hear him on that?
Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. All right, I'll try to talk loud. Thank you all for coming, and I guess thank you, Senator, for having me. When this catastrophic event did occur, there was public outreach. In the days that followed, I did speak with a number of the organizations that are involved with the lake. And I think what was alluded to earlier is sort of where we are with the city, and that is full transparency. I understand there's been a lot of history here. There's been a lot of history with different problems and money that was spent to alleviate those problems. It's talked about the pump station that was built at the other end of Lake Avenue, and that was to alleviate some of the flows that were coming in this direction. It did. That pump station did go online a little over a year ago. That took about 20% of the flow from the station and put it in the other direction. So what we had experienced was unrelated to that. It was unrelated to, we had a 100-year flood and a lot of flow coming to the station. Completely unrelated to that. So let me get into a little bit about what occurred. I'll tell you what we've done since then. I can direct sort of what's happening at the station and the system as it comes to, with regards to the effects on the lake, the water quality that's out there. I'm going to refer to others that have expertise in that area. And then we have other members from DEP and Fish and Wildlife that can address additional questions if they go in that direction. So just by way of the station back here, that pump station is the largest station in the city. It handles roughly 20% of the entire city flow, which is a good portion of flow for one station to handle. And it's not too difficult to understand. Everything's at the bottom of the hill. By design, when you design a sewer system, you go by gravity. Everything flows where it's going to go. Water will find its path of least resistance, which will be downhill. So typically when you design a system, that station is put at the bottom of the hill and you pump it up and over the rise and keep it, in this case, going to the wastewater treatment plant. So that pump station pumps the sewage up to Belmont Hill and then down Shrewsbury Street. That's the direction it's going. But because of that, it's got, one, a very high climb to make, which is part of the difficulty when a station like that goes down. Very difficult just to go find a pump, plug in the pump, and bypass that, which is one of the challenges we have. So let me get into a little bit about what occurred back on February 6th. And that was, in essence, a catastrophic failure. 7:30 in the morning, we did have crews respond to the facility and found that it was not only was wastewater overflowing across the parking lot into the lake, but also the facility itself was flooded. In the construction and design of a facility, I have usually 2 chambers. One is a receiving chamber of all the wastewater that comes down the hill. The second is where all your pumps and controls are housed. So it pumps out of that chamber, puts it in the system, and pumps it up. That's known as the dry side of the system. What occurred was there was a leak on the pump, on one of the 4 pumps that are in there. And that leak, even though the pump was pumping and there was flow moving, so everything thinks it's operating normally, there was a leak in that pump. And that allowed an amount of water to collect in that dry well. At some point, that level in the dry well rose a matter of 3-4 feet. Then it started coming into contact with all the electrical controls. At that point, everything started shorting out. The pumps started failing, and the station basically went into a complete failure. That was the catastrophic failure. Once that occurred, there really was not a lot of recovery. Shortly thereafter, you had the overflow into the lake. When we responded, we had a few challenges. One was getting into that flooded section of the station to shut down all the valves to keep any more flow from coming in there, and then pumping that out into a tanker to dry that section out, because that's where the pumps are. We need to get those pumps out, and we need to restart what we can. At the same time, we were also saying, well, if that doesn't work, what else can we do? We put an order out, searched basically the eastern seaboard, looking for pumps that we could set up on the outside to bypass that station. And for those that have gone by, that's what you see out there now, is a series of pumps. Those pumps came from as far away as Baltimore, Philadelphia. We needed those in order to bypass the station. There were pumps that size, big enough, if you will, that could bypass the station. Unfortunately, they couldn't bypass with the head. It was needed to push it up over the hill. I had a conversation that next morning with the executive director of MWRA and their sewerage division. They said, Jake, I've got this pump, but it's not going to do you any good. It's the right size, but it doesn't have the head. The head is what amounts to the force that's necessary to push that up and where it has to go. While we were in preparation of looking at acquiring the necessary piping, the necessary pumps to get here, which was going to take a couple days to get here, simultaneously we spent the night drying out that wet well with hopes that we could salvage 1 or 2 of those pumps, get them back up and running and stop the overflow. We had, as of the next morning, we had electricians in there trying to dry out the control panels, trying to grease and displace the water that had gotten into the motors. As of about 5:30 that afternoon, we were successful. After a failed attempt, we were successful the second time around to charge up a pump, and that was pump number 4. We got that up and running, and with that little bit of pump and moving the flow, we were successful in shutting down the overflow. So that's when it did cease. So after roughly 36 hours, with what we put in place, we were successful in stopping the overflow. Having said that, there was, as was alluded to, during the emergency, a series of notifications that went out, not only to organizations associated with the lake, internal communications with various departments to put notice out, also regulatory agencies, all of those folks were notified. In addition to looking at the pump station, what can we do here, how do we get bypass pumps coming, we also brought in a fleet of tanker trucks. It wasn't going to solve the problem, but at least it did everything we could in our power to minimize the amount of flow that could end up in the lake. And we were successful in taking almost 500,000 gallons of raw sewage out of the station and down to the treatment plant. Again, did it solve everything? No, but it was the best that we could do at the time with what we had to try and minimize what was going into the lake. So there was various testing that went on to put out the health advisory, not to be cautious of the lake. Subsequent testing did allow that health advisory to be lifted. We did have, last fall, there were complaints of odors at the station. With the result of the odors of the station, we did engage in an engineer to come out and start evaluating that station, looking at both the odors and is there something else that needs to happen with that station. The consultant firm that we were used was a world-known engineer. I want to say one of the top 10 in the country, but I don't know exactly what that number is, but they are very proficient and they have a large amount of resources available to them, which is why we had brought them in originally to look at the odor situation. And since the failure, we've further engaged and expanded their scope of work to assist us in evaluating what happened and then what do we need to do to make things better? So they're underway, they've been engaged in that pump station. To try and describe what occurred in the station, so you'll get an idea. Within that dry well, there are a series of 4 pumps. The 4 pumps are in essence go in series and parallel depending upon how much flow is coming to the station. In the winter, you have relatively lower flows. You're looking at roughly 3 to 4 million gallons a day come into that station. If it were a torrential rainstorm in the middle of the summer, you may have 15 or 20 million gallons a day of flow that comes into the station. So you have different pumps that will kick in depending upon how much flow comes into the station. You also have redundancy in that if this pump goes down, I have additional pumps that I can put on to replace the one that may go down. The station already, we had one pump that was down, so the second largest pump was the one that was operating at the time. What happened in that pump is I have an outer case of a pump, and I have an impeller in there that spins and rotates and basically pushes the flow out of that pump. In the casing that's built around that pump and around that impeller, a split in the casing actually developed, and it opened up to a hole about this big. So, let's say what, 6-inch hole, 4 to 6 inch hole of fluid was continually dumping on the ground. The pump's going, everything thinks it's moving, the wet well level is dropping, but at the same time, it's filling up a place that should be dry with water, with fluid. And eventually that's what caused that catastrophic failure. So we had also brought in addition to the team of engineers, we also brought in the pump manufacturer. They don't have an explanation of how this occurred or why it occurred. We've dismantled the pump, dismantled the housing. We've actually sent it off to some forensic engineers to look at it to say, what happened to this pump? We still don't have those answers. All of the study that's about to take place, that has been taking place, is probably not going to. We're probably not going to have their preliminary reports back until sometime mid-April towards the end of April. At that point, we'll at least have a really solid idea of okay, what happened, what caused the pump to fail, what caused the different aspects of the pump that caused that casing to split. Was that the only problem? You know, was there vibrations? Was there straight currents? Was there something else that created this combination of things to happen? The one thing that we do have is we did get those pumps, those other pumps, we did get those on site. They have been set up on site so that in the event that there's either a problem with the pump station or we need to take that pump station offline to do other analysis or to take some of those pumps out of place, we have that exterior pumps that with basically a flick of the switch, those will bypass the station completely and continue with the operation of the pump station. So that's sitting there as a redundant system right now that we can put into place. I don't have any plans to remove that until we've come full circle and we know exactly where we're going to be and what we have to do. I have questions in the back. Again, I don't know, Senator, if you want me to start with questions now, or...
If you have a question, please just raise your hand. And just say who you are, so...
Yeah, there's an alarm system inside of the pumping area, right?
There are alarms in that station, of course.
A Wi-Fi alarm system, it notifies. At what point is it notifying that you've got water filling up both rooms, the electrical room and the pumping room? Or is there a high water alarm in a pumping station that's dealing with water? Is there a high water alarm that could have notified your department and been able to get there and maybe shut that broken pump down?
Great question. And in that pump station, there are, I believe the number is 148 alarm points. What that means, if there's a situation in the wet well that you might expect, if that level in where all the fluid's coming in, if that gets too high, it triggers an alarm. If there's a power failure, it triggers an alarm. There's 148 of those actual alarm points. There was not an alarm looking for water in an area that was supposed to be dry. I can't tell you why.
Okay, just 1 second.
Yep,
We're talking about $100 high water alarm at a multi-million-dollar pumping station. Did somebody forget that? Did they just forget to put one in? I know you were in charge then, I understand. But doesn't it make sense that you would have that in there in case a seal broke, a valve broke, a pump broke, and filled up those areas and just like it did, shut it all down? I mean, it's a simple thing that probably may have been overlooked, I don't know, didn't exist, but I've lived on this lake my whole life, and I know that pumping station fails about every 3 to 5 years.
you know, hindsight is, you're spot on.
3 to 5 years, religiously that pumping station fails.
Yep.
That whole area is full of acronym.
I mean, there's alarms, as I say, there's a number of alarms. If the pump gets too hot, it sends an alarm off. If there's too much vibration, it sends an alarm off. If, certain things are happening, it sends an alarm off. In hindsight, we needed one more alarm port. I can't deny that.
Has it been installed?
It's in the works of being installed, yes. There's
Yeah,
cameras
see
in
what's
there,
next
there's visual
time.
inspections in there, there's a number of things that are in there. When they,
That's a very gross oversight when you think about all the engineers and all the money, $10 million, that someone would forget something as simple as a pipe could split, a pump could blow. That's such an oversight after how much money, how many times have we spent this money?
and I can't speak for the engineers that did the design, but
I understand.
you're looking at, well, we've got the pressure monitor here, and I've got this monitor here and that, so,
Any other questions?
If you have a sump pump in that dried space to keep the water levels from rising,
That wouldn't be enough.
And I believe there's a sump pump, as one would logically think. I haven't personally seen a sump pump in there. I've been in there, and if there was, clearly it didn't keep up with the flow. I mean, there may be a very minor one for, minor flow, but wouldn't handle it in this case.
Mrs. Finley?
My name is Kathy Violet, I live on the south end of the lake, and I've lived here my whole life. I want to know if we have adequate construction, pumping, all that to meet the needs of the current lake neighborhoods. We've seen significant growth, so here we are, do we remedy this and still have an inadequate pumping station?
And my answer to that logic would say no. You don't have a situation where you have too much flow or there's gonna be too much growth that will come to the station. Remember what we just talked about, we've taken about 20% of that flow off with the expansion of the pump station that's down the street. So you've got that opened up that much more capacity here, it's not a capacity. Within the system itself, you do have other opportunities to tighten that system and continually reduce the flow that's coming to the station. And that's, another aspect of what the city is doing, is evaluating the various areas of the sewer system, trying to remove extraneous flow, remove rainwater that's getting into that system, to reduce that flow, continually reduce that flow, again, to minimize the amount of flow that's not only coming here, but also that you're paying to treat, transport, and send to Upper Blackstone. So to answer your question, it's not a capacity situation.
So the infrastructure can handle the capacity of the
Yes,
cells.
yes, it's not a capacity situation.
Mike?
My name's Mike Spillane. I live right down the street in the building. I'm your neighbor, Jay. This is the first time I'm meeting. I appreciate your expert testimony here before all the folks. I gotta tell you, this gentleman right here, he hit the nail on the head. I'm not an engineer, but I know that it might be time for the city of Worcester to reevaluate its relationships with the engineers upon which it depends to deliver basic service. Has that been done?
Yes, the engineering firm that we brought in has not had anything to do with that station, so they're getting a fresh look at it. Which is why we brought them in originally, to deal with the odor problems and else. I want the biggest, the best, whoever can come in with an independent judgment. That's why we brought them in.
Because if I was in your shoes, I would consider termination immediately of these services if that very reasonable solution was totally overlooked from the very beginning in 2015. And I know that the goal of this meeting is complete transparency. To that end, will you pledge to make that paperwork from 2015 available to the public on exactly all the engineering services that will provide to the city of Worcester, to these folks here in this building?
I think 2015 was 20, right?
Well, no, the money was spent here too. There was money to modernize the station here. I will pledge to make available what it is that possibly you're looking for. We're still poring over what we have for engineering documents, and we're providing those to the engineer, that it is there now, looking at the various design, to see what they did do to design, and then what things they didn't do. Did they, when you go in to modernize a station, what am I gonna do? Am I gonna replace the pumps that were there? Am I gonna replace the control panel was there? Or am I gonna start from scratch, blank piece of paper? What do I need to put here? And then look at what's put in that station. Not in this case. I've been in other places where we did a pump station rehabilitation, and they put in a new pump, they put in new controls, and the first day it went into operation, manhole in the middle of the street blew up. What happened? How did this happen? And they said, well, we put in the same pumps that were there originally. I said, but didn't you do any engineering? Didn't you do any design work? Well, no, we put in the same pumps that was originally spec'd for the station. Okay, so because that station was 20 years old, and those pumps were 20 years old, they're only pumping at 30% capacity. Now you put in new pumps with 100% capacity, and it blew up in the street. Was that a surprise to you? Those engineers I got rid of. But that's not the case here. And I don't mean to make light of it. It's just, we need some, and that's why I looked at these engineers, because they are independent. And we expect that we're going to get an evaluation from them. At the end of the day, if we're not comfortable with what they found or how deep they dug, I have no problem going out and getting a third engineer to come in and oversee what they're doing to make sure that, we call it peer review, what the final solution is going to be acceptable.
Thank you.
Before I forget, Steve, sit up for a minute. I just want to acknowledge that Steve's been working with us, and he's actually the individual that set this location up and actually did a great job getting the word out for all of us. So,
One question kind of goes back to the history of this. This is not the first time since that, Mike Kalinowski, I've been here for 25 years. This is not the first time this ballpark has had to deal with this sport, and this has been going on for years. In most cases, multiple times per year. So you're talking about a lake that's probably half full of, whatever you want to call it, over the last 20 years. Every time we sat through these scenarios and listened to everybody and this, that, and the other thing, where they can't do anything because there's a funny hill and it all flows down, we've heard all the excuses in the world over the last 20 years. What's stopping the game from continuing? What are you going to do differently?
well, hopefully, it's the engineers who they're hiring are going to come in and develop, give us recommendations on the
You're
system.
saying the last 20 years of engineering you had are basically all idiots?
No, from the city. As I stated, when I got elected, we were able to get there's been $30 million spent. $10 million from the state, another 10 from the city on rerouting, as he said, 20% of the sewer flow that was coming into those pipes, rerouting that so it was going directly into the upper Blackstone. Now, similar to you, and then the city did another one, spent another $10 million. Similar to you, when I heard the overflow that this happened, my first call was to the city to make sure, we had been told that once that $20 million had been spent, that this wouldn't happen anymore. That $20 million, the work on Route 20 was going to alleviate these 100-year storms and this sewer going into the lake. So that's where we are right now. It happened again, we're working with the city, trying to make sure that the adequate resources and they're gonna put the proper infrastructure. I'm just saying, I can't go back over the last 20 years.
And if I may just offer this, you know, a few days post the accident and, you know, when we had things back under control, the city manager did come, tour the station, went through all the station. And he was very critical of the status of the station, as well as what had just happened. And he looked at me and said, Jay, what do you need? How much money do you need to get this thing fixed? How much, tell me what you need to make sure this never happens again. And I appreciated that. I told him, I can't give you an answer right now. I will give you an answer, but I can't give you one right now. So, and I just relay that because that shows the level of seriousness, commitment that the city manager is willing to, you know, invest and take to fix this once and for all. Because like all of you, you know, everyone's done listening to this happened, it's going to happen again. No, it can't happen again. So what needs to be put in place that's not? I will tell you that I think part of the challenges with the station there is that you're dealing with a very small lot. If you had if space were not the issue, you could have rebuilt a newer station, a bigger station, and we probably wouldn't even be here or talking today. That may have been what was some of the driving force back in 2015-16 when they looked at rebuilding that station. That may have been some of the limitations. I don't know. I wasn't part of that design team. But one of the things that we're going to be doing and looking at is, okay, and that's what I'm looking at the engineers to put on the table. What are the options? What are the things that we should be looking at, what we should be considering? And I need to wait till that gets on the table before we can even look at that. But there is a directive from the highest level within the city to say, get me what I need to make sure this doesn't happen again. And that's where we're going.
This group here lives in Follies Cove, Edgemere. So when it goes that way, it doesn't go just to Half Moon, it comes to Follies Cove first. And it collects there. I get leaves every season, and we get all the stuff comes into our shoreline and dumps there. And you get the syringes, you get ladies' private products, you get all kinds of trash that comes into that. Plus we have a dump line coming from the local drainage system, dumping right into our cove where all of our kids swim, our grandkids. So because of this year, we've said enough. We put in a 12 by 12 pool up on the lawn that we're gonna put up next month and not allowing the kids to go in the water anymore because of the amount of trash and everything else and junk that comes into the lake anymore. Makes it too dangerous to have our own kids in there, our grandkids. And nobody's doing anything about it, they just talk about it. That's why we're a little upset this time. We've heard so much talk about but not doing it right. Oh yeah, we do this, yeah, well, that didn't work, here we go again. So, yeah, we're not trying to be mean or anything else, just we've been here too many times. We've been down this path too many times. And we'd really like to just have something set in stone that we're going to find a way to resolve this before anything else happens, before the dangerous spillage go on, where we reroute it somewhere else before the spill again. Anything that says we're not going to get more of this in the lake again. We just had too many years, and not just once a year. Thank you. I apologize.
No, I appreciate the sentiment, and I share it with you. And just to let you know, I mean, there's nothing that's off the table. When it's all said and done,
We depend on you.
I understand, and we take that very seriously.
Which we look forward to.
Just can I ask you on his point, Terry McNamara, I live on the other end of the lake, Edgemere. What's your honest, what do you think is the best way forward? What do you think we should do?
We need to let the process carry on. We need to let the engineers that have gone in the station look at it. What's the problem? We have weekly meetings with them. We have weekly meetings with the contractors that are overseeing running that station to find out what things need to be done. And every week we're moving in this direction, we're moving in that direction. They're asking about, what was the design in the prior, what did they look at? What didn't they look at? Did they look at, the hydraulic analysis within the wet well or within the piping that's coming down the hill? Don't know, but we can get you the people that were here and have them look at that. I can't honestly tell you, everybody should be, you know,
But-
standing in line asking
One
for.
question, do we need a different station? Do they have to rebuild the station, or can they fix the one that's there? I mean, what do you, I'm just asking what do you think?
I mean, looking at what was done in the station, there are some portions of that station are problematic, as I've said. Part of it is the postage stamp lot. Part of it is the confines of that lot. Can they expand underground out into the street area? Is there a place to put some of these structures? It is a very large station. I don't know until they do their analysis, this is what's needed. It's very easy to go and say, I've got a blank lot over here, I can build a station, I know everything's new, what's coming in here. That's not the case. What you've got is a station that has been sitting at that location for 100 years. So it's, you know, there's a lot that needs to go into it. It can't be a back of the envelope, well, we need a 60 horsepower pump, and I need this and that should work. No, we're gonna be demanding much more than that.
But so, a couple months we'll have sort of a better idea.
But hopefully by the end of April, I'll have a very good idea of what the engineers have seen and what direction we need to go.
So I'm Paula Thomas from Shrewsbury, I live on Point Pond. So I guess the elephant in the room is exactly that. I'm a little bit shocked to find out that 20% of the sewage from Worcester goes to the lake. He's telling me that there's nowhere in the city, in that 20% of the city, that we could put a station that makes more sense than at the shore of a resource like this. That's what to me is, I can't wrap my head around that. So when you're looking at solutions, my request would be to, maybe it's halfway up the hill. Because even that, like I'm thinking from a physics perspective, I'm trying to understand, it seems counterintuitive that it flows to the bottom, but then you gotta push it back up. So the pushing it back up seems to me to be pretty difficult. So it seems like halfway down would be more logical in both directions. Am I just thinking of that way too simply? But it just seems to me that the elephant in the room is this station sitting on the shores of Lake Quinsigamond is a bad plan. And in the time I've been here, which is now 30 years, I guess, plus, it happens all the time. And every time it comes back like, whoops, and then, oh, that won't happen again. And then there's never any accountability. If that were my house and I dumped 10,000 gallons into the lake, I would be fined a ludicrous amount of money and publicly shamed for having a storage system that didn't work. This has happened at this station multiple times, and every time it just feels like, well, the water moves fast enough, it'll go by, just don't swim for a couple weeks. Right now it's winter, no one's swimming, who cares? And that attitude for me, where I'm having the issue, and I'd like to see a proposal that moves at least half of that up the hill, down the street. I don't care, it's 20% of the city, there's gotta be enough space.
Yeah, thank you, Paula, for speaking frankly, and I think we really all need to speak frankly. So, the station's not the problem. Design of the system is the problem. And I really resent this focus on the station like you're gonna fix it and it's never gonna break again. That's just not gonna happen. Failures occur. It's the location of the station and the design of the system that puts such tremendous load on that system, on that pump station. So what I wanna know is, when is the city of Worcester gonna make a commitment to redesigning the system? I know it's gonna be very expensive. When are you gonna redesign the system so the load is taken off that station so that when failures occur, you can actually handle it? And about the 20 or 30 million dollars that's been spent, okay, how much is the natural resource of Lake Quinsigamond worth? It's worth a whole lot more than $30 million. And so, if you have to redesign the entire system of the city of Worcester's sewage system, that's what needs to happen. And I'm really curious, because Paul, you're absolutely right. If you had a spill, you'd be fine. There's a thing called natural resource damages. You guys are ruining this lake. The EPA should take you to court. And I don't know why it hasn't happened yet. But this is unacceptable. You are focusing on the station. The station's not the problem. It's going to keep failing. We've proved that over the last 35 years I've been here anyway. So what are you going to do to redesign the system so that station is no longer a problem?
If it were that easy, you know, it could be done. I'm not gonna tell you that we can't go down that road. We're gonna look, as I said, we're gonna look at all options.
Okay,
Just to build on that, is there any legal, are you getting fined? Is anything, is anyone gonna pay
I don't need to pay
anything?
pressure on you, but we got DEP here, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm Mary Jude Pixley, I'm the Regional Director of the Worcester Office of DEP. Mary Stone is the Deputy Regional Director for all our water programs. First of all, let me thank Senator Moore for being able to be here tonight. We share your frustration. We've been dealing with the city a long time on this. We're anxiously awaiting an after-action report, which we've requested that will take us from the beginning to the improvements that have been made. The Commissioner briefly mentioned the bypass that's in place. My understanding is that bypass is going to be permanently available. Is that correct?
The goal will be to have a bypass permanently available, whether it's those exact pumps or something better, we're not sure yet.
Right, so that's something the DEP is pleased about. I'm also happy to hear the Commissioner mention the infiltration inflow, I&I, investigation. It's something that we've asked for a lot, to take some of the water that doesn't belong going to the treatment plant, out of the pipes, out of the system. I think that is money well spent to do an I&I investigation. And as to enforcement, I knew the question was gonna come up, I wasn't sure how quickly. It's something I can't share with you. I haven't met with the city yet, we've had one conversation on the phone, but I can't really address to things that are enforcement. I can't really speak to specific enforcement when we haven't met with the city yet, but I can tell you we're gonna be meeting with the city and there will be an enforcement action. But other than that, I can't really speak to any of the specifics at this time.
That's right, and I understand that. It's just, I mean, living in Massachusetts, you know, if you do any of this, you're gonna get fined to high heaven, and I'm just amazed that's what happened here.
Just to be clear, we're interested at first in the corrective actions. I mean, before we look for penalty money, we want the city to spend money on corrective actions. So just keep that in mind, that that's a really important part of it, is directing scarce municipal dollars to the right things.
Can I have one more question? I'll never say anything again. I'm new to the lake. Are you surprised at what you're hearing from everybody here about the long history of these kind of problems? I mean, you guys must know this is continuously happening.
We are aware of the past incident. I've been at DEP for 20 years, and Ariel's been here, I think, 30 years.
Okay.
We are aware, we have worked with the city in the past, we've come up with the notification protocols, which are important. We want to revisit those. They date back to 2016, I think, at this point, 2017. We want to make sure those are updated, because the public notification is really important. We have new regulations about combined sewers and sanitary sewer overflows that have just this January become effective. We're going to be working with the city on implementation of those new notification rules. There's a lot about that, but we have been here before, but we have a good relationship with the city, and I think we're going to be able to work through something that will put into place a plan to improve things.
How about cleanup? Any actions going on in cleanup with your department at all?
I'm not sure what you mean by cleanup. I mean, what happened, the lake was frozen and things went downstream.
Are you asking if there's a need for cleanup?
Yeah, is there a need, and is that being looked at?
So I'm gonna put Todd on the spot to
No,
talk.
Todd's was Fish and Wildlife.
Hey, cleanup's yours, fish are mine.
Clean up so the fish are safe. And the ground.
Is there a better emergency management plan being put in place than there was that responded to the 100-year flood that we see every year now?
In terms of notification, we were notified early Sunday morning. I mean, the city reported to DEP as they are directed to do. We were aware of the tanker trucks coming to pump, take stuff to Upper Blackstone. We were aware that there weren't enough trucks to accomplish that.
But it happens every year. Is there a better emergency management plan being put in place so that it can safeguard us who live on the water?
Yeah, and we're gonna be working with the city. We're, like I said, anxious to hear what their plan is, what they're proposing. The bypass is a good start. To have a permanent bypass in place, you don't need to go look for the pumps. You have the pumps if there is another catastrophic failure. And it was a catastrophic failure. It wasn't someone left a valve open, or someone forgot to shut something off at the end of the day. Well, it was a catastrophic failure, but those have happened before, I understand that. and that's something that we want to address a plan going forward. It's not up to us to tell them what to do. As the commissioner has said, they have engineers. They need to look at the system, they need to figure out what makes sense, bring that to us, and then we'll talk about a way to implement that in an enforceable manner. Do you want to?
Oh, wait, do you have a DEP question?
Yes.
Okay.
My name is Sarah Cronin. I live up on the Shrewsbury side, across from the regatta there. I was curious, this happened on February 6th, and the DEP still hasn't met with the city. Like, what is the standard there?
Well, we were out on Monday morning, after on Sunday, we were there Monday morning, it's not that we haven't met. I haven't met with the commissioner to speak about enforcement, or what that looks like, or what we're gonna be doing going forward. Our staff, our technical staff have been talking to the city all along. I have a stack of emails that we were getting hourly, every hour updates after it happened, updates on the pumps coming in. So our technical staff have been getting all the information that we need. I'm interested, as you are, in the corrective steps to go forward, and that's the meeting that we want to do.
I'm not sure who this is for, but I live on the Shrewsbury side as well. Could you give me a definition of actually what was actually spilled into the lake, as far as was it 80% rainwater, 20% raw sewage, vice versa? I mean, I have no idea what actually ended up in the lake.
I would have to defer to the commissioner. I mean, technically, it's a sewage pump station. It's the sanitary sewage line.
Untreated. Do you have numbers? Percentages?
Given that on February 6th, the flows were relatively low, there was not a rain event or significant precipitation event that preceded that, the assumption would be that it was significantly raw sewage and it was not diluted with any kind of rainwater precipitation.
Is it 6 million gallons? I've heard different numbers.
5.75, yes.
All right, sir?
We know the age of the parks have failed. Were these parks replaced during rehab back in 2014, 2015?
I believe the pump itself was from the 2014-2000 vintage, yes. I believe that is correct.
What would your expectation be for the life of that pump? Is that 6 or 7 years? Is that normal?
No. Pumps would, it's compared to an engine block of your car. It goes 200,000 miles. And unless you let it run out of oil, it's not going to split. This was bizarre. The manufacturers have no idea why it split the way it did, which again is why we're going through some forensics to figure out what happened.
Another question I think was going to answer the wicket system on the front yard there. Is there any reason to ever take that out?
Well, the system that was put in place in the park, in the driveway, in the front yard, that was put in reactionary, if you will, because of the failure. We had, again, looking at when the engineers came in September and first got engaged, looking at the odor control stuff, we also looked at, well, if we need to start taking apart the station, that's when the thought came as far as putting in a redundant system, putting in something that we could bypass it and take the system offline so we could look at odors and different things. They did some of the piping work, but it was never envisioned that we would need to get into that in February. It was anticipated that we'd look at part of a planned program progress sometime in this summer coming up. So while the pumps that are there were brought in a hurry, we are also looking at, and those are rented pumps, we're looking at actually purchasing and permanently placing, much more permanent way, pumps that would stay there and act as a completely redundant system.
So as the city of Worcester continues to grow and hundreds of apartment buildings are being built, is the city of Worcester going to be adding additional sub pumps or anything to help handle the amount of increased sewage that is going to be by the amount of people that continue to come to the city?
Well, again, if you're looking at the city's growth, I think the amount of growth that is contributory to the station is much less than what I would expect out of the city as a whole, because there are many other areas that are being developed, both housing and otherwise. So each development project, if you will, depending upon its geographical area, then does an analysis whether you have sufficient water, you have sufficient sewerage available, whether you have sufficient stormwater available. So to make a blanket statement about the growth of the city as a whole and how it relates to the station, I can't really make that correlation. It's a good point, but it's again.
And then for the 100-year-old building that's there now, that pump station, is there a certain point that the city of Worcester decides, you know what, maybe 100 years is enough, we're gonna retire this, you know, instead of like renovating the police station or another city building, let's take that money to work on infrastructure or sewage, you know, it's not all pretty stuff, so kind of just clean up our city.
No, and not related to the growth, but I think that's the point where we are. And that was my comment previously, is we really want to see what the engineers bring back to see what options are available to us.
Michael?
Yeah, I think Bill is alluding to, as far as cleanup goes, we have solid raw sewage now, and particularly right there at the pump station, you can see it, the sediment, right off the line. I guess, is there a plan, it might be more Todd or Mary's involvement, do we get some type of involvement to clean up the bottom of the lake?
Your point, I have an underwater ROV with full camera capability. I'll send it down, anybody wants to give me a hand, we'll videotape the entire area. Is that coming off of that building where that pump is, all low, it's not over 6-7 foot deep there. It goes out to the edge and then it drops off to like 80-90 feet.
I guess are those tools used in cleanups?
If you want to use it, I'll make it available to you.
So this untreated sewage coming off the hospitals as well, not just your average day at home.
Yes, my name's Betty, I live on Bay Road in Shrewsbury on the lake.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Well, the question wasn't answered though. The question before with Todd here, he's gonna answer the question.
Yeah, so from Fish and Wildlife's perspective, and thanks Senator Moore for getting everybody together, it's really good to see lots of people who really care about the resources, because that's what we survive on at Mass Wildlife, is people who actually know and understand the resource and care for it, right? So that question though, I gotta start with like the hardest one I'm ever gonna get, because we don't go in and actually remove stuff. We go, I can talk about 3 different aspects of our response to this issue when it happened. The first one was that we have in place a fish kill MOU with DEP, right? So we serve as the triage. If there are dead fish seen, someone calls us and we're on site. We get on site and we determine whether or not we think there's an actual pollution caused kill. This would not have been a head scratcher, right? If we had come here and seen fish, we have a known cause, we call DEP's emergency response. DEP's emergency response comes, does a triage, and does their job. Our job is then to try to enumerate and speciate, to identify and count the fish there, because those can be associated with other penalties in a subsequent phase. No dead fish were seen at this site, right? Part of that is because it's winter, it's really cold. The biggest thing that's gonna kill fish with this situation is dropping DO, dissolved oxygen, right? But it's so cold that the water holds a lot of oxygen, right? So we didn't see any fish, and we looked. And Jason Stolarski is our fish kill coordinator, and I called him and I said, did we look? You know, did DEP look? Yes, they did. People on site looked and were trying to pay attention to it. The ice, if I remember right from Jason's interpretation, was kind of sketchy around that site with all that water coming in, and it's hard to get there and actually take a look under. Had we the ROV or a budget to get an ROV, then that's what we were talking about, is okay, how do we address this issue if it happens in some other time? Very few issues happen that result in fish kills during the winter, but we always in the spring see the results of eutrophication and low dissolved oxygen and winter kill. So when you're walking around the shore this year, whether it's Quinsigamond or any place else, it's possible to see dead fish. If you see lots of dead fish, you call that fish kill response line. Most of the ones early spring are natural, low dissolved oxygen fish kills. So you get thick ice and snow on top of that ice, and then it isolates the water surface. The water doesn't mix, the dissolved oxygen doesn't respond in the pond, and in some cases you get fish kills just about every year in a lot of our smaller ponds. It's a relatively natural phenomenon that gets made worse the more nutrients that you put into the pond. We didn't see anything at this site, and with Jacqueline's data that she provided to us, it seems pretty apparent that the dissolved oxygen was never a critical factor throughout that whole water column, right? So we don't expect to see anything now. What we're concerned about, and why we continue to monitor fisheries populations throughout time, we have a lot of data on Lake Quinsigamond going back. I've been here 30 years, and there was a lot of data before I got here. That's why we do this, so we can try to detect these kind of changes, but they're not so acute that we're gonna say, yeah, okay, everything's gone now because of this, right? There are lots of changes over time. This is a very urbanized watershed. There's a lot of little bits and pieces. That's why we just wanna make sure that people are doing the best they can to reduce their inputs to these things and protect their watershed. The last thing that I'll mention, and I don't have the voice piece, so that was my bad. I should have asked for that right off. My assumption always is that everybody can hear you, but that's not what this is for. This is a different purpose. So we talked about the fish kill part and the response, and what's going to be coming up within the next month, we're going to start rolling stocking trucks in the Central District. Todd Olanek is the Central District Manager. He runs that show, and they stock, I wouldn't be able to isolate Central District, but we stock more than 500 locations statewide, brook, brown, rainbow, and tiger trout for recreational purposes, and people love them, and people do a lot of fishing, and you see lots of people fishing on this pond. So we put every year somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 catchable fish into this pond. And so if the question is, are we going to continue to do that considering the effluent here, the answer is yes, again, because of the good work that Jacqueline's done to be able to show us that this pond is in decent shape for the seasonal trout fishery. If we have any other issues, we expect those to pop up in the summer, and that's why we'll continue to monitor, and I spoke with Jacqueline earlier, and she's going to continue to monitor as well. But this will not affect this spring's trout stocking into the pond. And then, again, our long-term concern is to keep monitoring Lake Quinsigamond and as many other water bodies as we can get to kind of keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on with these resources. So it's kind of a daunting task. Our whole agency is 150 people, probably 20 or 30 of which do any lake and pond sampling, and we have 300 great ponds and probably 1,000 other water bodies that we monitor too, and we do the best that we can for a small agency. Thank you.
I was wondering if they know what tests are happening, water flowing off of the hospitals that are where those patients are on medications and whatnot, that kind of sewerage. Where we test things like COVID levels from sewage, this is untreated sewage. Do we know what kind of impact from this body of water, any flow off from the hospitals specifically, may have on the natural wildlife in there?
I'm going to call that an emerging science, right? So things like PFAS or other issues that have been associated with those, and people are studying that like crazy, but the impacts are not as known as, like, we talk about mercury and PCBs, right? Everybody understands the risk associated with those things. These are currently being studied, but it's not widely evident as to what the specific issues are going to be for those chemicals.
Betty.
Fish and wildlife question? No.
Yeah, I couldn't hear what you said. I heard UMass mentioned. But why is UMass being allowed to keep building more buildings and more buildings and more buildings, and the storage is coming out of there left and right? How are they getting all these permits?
So I believe the question was how are these various buildings that were previously talking about developments getting permits to tie into the system. There's capacity within the system, and that's what the city looks at as far as being able to allow development to go forward. So, as I indicated earlier, what occurred here was not a capacity-related issue. So, where there's available capacity, the city has allowed the developments to go forward.
Well, how can you say they have the capacity if this is happening so often? Now we've got a VA hospital going in. We've got a new nursing training center going in. Where's it all going to go?
So the development that's happening up at the old state hospital site, all of that actually isn't coming down the hill. Where that location actually is going right to Shrewsbury Street and it's going in that direction. It's not coming down yet.
So we're gonna have just as many problems on Shrewsbury Street.
Well, no, what you're referring to is the Woodland Drive pump station, which is, again, different part of the various systems. We have, within the city,
You're
there's.
saying the system can only hold so much capacity. But yet you drive around this lake and see how close these houses are being built to each other and upon each other. There's no more land or privacy on the lake. Now you're adding UMass Hospital, you're adding condos up here and another grocery store up here.
That's Shrewsbury.
That's Shrewsbury. So where is all this gonna go?
That's going right to the pump station.
Yeah, but Worcester can't handle it all.
No, it can't.
Within the city, we have roughly 30 pump stations. So that there's 30 different pump stations. Again, the development that we're talking about, we're questioning, is not going to this station. It's not going to Woodland Drive. It's going down a larger gravity pipe, and it's heading right for Upper Blackstone.
All right,
I have a question for Fish and Wildlife. I am wondering too about the fish with bioaccumulation problems. I mean, we've been polluting the lake, I don't know. On record, it's been 2016 we had overflow, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, and we've had a lot more times where DPW have been scrambling to probably prevent another overflow event from happening. But I think one, bioaccumulation, is that going to be an issue with all these different chemicals going in there? And then, I know we talk about fish, but that's a general term. Is there some more species we should be worried about than others? Or, turtles at the side that are getting decimated with wastewater and stuff drifting up the shore, are those being destroyed?
So I'll start out by sticking to the fish part. Department of Public Health issues fish consumption advisories, which address that bioaccumulation issue that you're talking about. So staff from DEP or Mass Wildlife have gone out in the past, collected fish samples to be processed by the Department of Public Health, the experimental station where they do the testing. And primarily it's PCB, mercury, and a lot of cogeners, a lot of different chemicals, dioxin and other things too. So pay attention to the fish consumption advisories that are issued. If that is a concern of yours, then that's where you're going to get the best information about the fish health. What they have said, which addresses the trout specifically, is that because the trout are raised in our hatcheries, our 5 state fish hatcheries, they're exempt from the fish consumption advisories, right? So that there's a footnote in there that says that the trout are okay to eat, right? So they're exempt from those advisories, but get all the rest of your advisory information from the Department of Public Health. They do a water body by water body list, and they have different levels of risk associated with it and different recommendations for number of meals a month or different public groups that can consume fish or should not consume fish.
good.
Hi, Kate Holman, Worcester resident, member of the Lake Quinsigamond Watershed Association.
Fish and Wildlife with city?
It's actually for quite a few, I've got 3 questions.
Okay.
I've been patient. So it'll be very quick and painless, I think swear. One, to just, I'll get you off the boat pass,
Okay.
not fish joke.
So many fishes, yes!
So the Board of Health, the risk to health, that's very good information about bioaccumulation. However, I was wondering if you were going to post any of that information physically and maybe in different languages. Because we do have some cultural, populations in the city that do fish and do eat. So maybe that would be good to maybe just actually have a poster, get it on there. A couple different maybe that would be helpful. That's my little suggestion.
Okay.
I can speak to that, Gia.
Oh, so this is Jackie?
Hey.
So this is Jackie.
Oh, Jackie, nice to meet you.
So she's the lakes woman for Worcester.
Oh, no, just on that topic, and we could do better,
Jackie.
sorry. Of course. So to that point, we have posted the fish consumption guidance on the City of Worcester Lakes and Ponds website. So if you go to worcesterma.gov/bluespace, you can find that there. The City of Worcester website also has the capacity of translating into other languages. I don't know if that document can be translated, but I'm sure that DPH's website can be. So just information on that. I'm sure we could do a better job of getting that information out to more of the lakes and pond access points as well.
Thank you, Jack. You guys observe right now who Jackie is? She's kind of a big deal. She does a lot.
Do you have another question?
I have two more questions. Sorry. So the second question is mitigation efforts. I heard a little bit about transparency, and I do applaud the amount of transparency that we do have. I'd like to see that transparency maybe shared with some important factors in the community. DEP is great. We have a really strong communication relationship with them. DCR, I think, would probably be helpful because they do have 2 points on the lake. And I think one of the next steps that happens, I would personally like to see that become public. So I know that there's a lot of talks that have to happen between DEP, engineering, City of Worcester. But if there could be some type of a mitigative, I don't know, what I imagine like as a younger person, like comic book heroes, everybody has a seat at that table. I would like to see that. I think to put a lot of, residents and people invested, put their minds at rest. I would love to see some of that mitigative, operations or talks be made public, especially the next steps. Before a few months go by and, we're still questioning that. And then to kind of.
Answer that one first?
Yeah, sure.
Well, and it's not really a question, I think it's more of a suggestion and one that we'll take wholeheartedly, in that whatever comes out of the various reports and whatnot, we'll be publishing those reports with the city council. We'll welcome having additional meetings like this where, you folks that have questions, will have an opportunity to ask, so what did you find? What are the next steps? What options are there going forward? And, I have, again, there's nothing that we're not going to explore. There's no rock that we won't, hesitate to overturn and see what's under it. And I'm sure that, in keeping with the city manager's general direction as far as, hey, we got to fix this. What do you need? Because beyond the fix, there's then going to be sort of the monetary side. Okay, now we need the money for the fix. And that's when, if we can't justify what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, and why that's the best option and path forward, then we're not going to be able to get to the next step, and that is, how are we going to fund it?
Jerry, maybe this goes to your question. You got members of the Shrewsbury Lake Commission. Is there a Worcester and Shrewsbury, or just one Lake Commission?
Lake Commission, thank you for asking that question. Aaron, a lot of times, no one understands it. Lake Commission.
I'm just wondering if the DPW can share the information with the Lake Commission.
Yeah, so we're basically a state agency. We're a autonomous from the cities and towns. We're made up of the communities of Worcester, Grafton, and Shrewsbury. So there's representatives from each of the communities on the commission. So yes, and we hold all the permits for weed mitigation and whatnot in Lake Quinsigamond, the testing permits, all of that stuff. So in essence, the commission manages the lake. We have statutory authority over Lake Quinsigamond. We can make rules, set speed limits, whatnot. So that's kind of what we do. Our from my perspective at least, with the commission, that we'd like to have all of those test results and answers to questions like Gia brought up. Thank you. And Gia helps us with that. It's a collaboration between Worcester's Lakes and Ponds and the Lake Commission and the Lake Quinsigamond Watershed Association. I'm hoping that everyone in this room joins the Watershed Association, because that's really your voice. That's what can bring you answers to a lot of these questions. With the Lake Commission, though, we want to get as much information as possible from all the people who are testing within the lake, and that's the state and the city and the town of Shrewsbury and the town of Grafton to some extent. So we work with the DCR to bring the dam up and down. We work with the folks at DCR for the parks and stuff. We issue permits for races and all that. One of the other important programs we're working on now is to kind of take testing under our wing. So, if you would ask me what's the most dangerous thing in Lake Quinsigamond today, I wouldn't answer that it was the sewer spill. I'd say that's a bad thing, and it's not something that you like to see, but it happens, acutely. But we have over 200 outflows coming into Lake Quinsigamond, streams, pipes, all kinds of things. And those flow 365 days a year. And for the most part, we don't know what's coming out of it, and we don't know what's coming from. And when we talk about, say, the project on the top of Belmont Hill, whereas I'm not sure where the sewage is going there, I guess it's going the other direction, but the runoff from the street is coming here. And we've had a couple of blooms from the projects that have come down into the lake 3 or 4 times, I think, before we got them stopped. So those are the types of things that we really want to focus on. So our goal is to basically test as many of those outfalls as we possibly can to determine what's coming into the lake and eventually where it's coming from. So yeah, we want to be a conduit for that. You can see that because Jacqueline graces us every month with a detailed and colorful report of what's happening in the lake from her monitoring. We've got a monitoring buoy right out in front of us here, and one down the other side of the lake, which is what gives us our DO samples and whatnot. So, we're trying to make that as public as possible. You can, come to us and come to the website and get on that. And also, I would recommend that you look at the website for Worcester Lakes and Ponds, Blue Space. It's a mini URL or something like that. I don't know the address. I just type it in Google.
Now you got another question, Les.
I did, I do, still. But yes, Pete makes a very good point about coupling, or compounding. If we can figure out our state of the lake by monitoring, we can know how badly this catastrophic event will affect it. So I think getting that framework, strong will help us in the future, which kind of led into my first statement / question of, can we monitor this, and can we also monitor it when corrective action talks happen, like DEP we're talking about? Can we instill an element of monitoring for certain when those talks happen regarding corrective action? So that way, in the future, when something like this happens, we can have a good understanding correctly of what the state of this lake is. That is a question. Yes.
Somewhere in there is a question.
Is that possible for those reasons?
So one of the things she's asking about is when this spill happened, if there had been a bigger communication, people might not have done laundry that day, or run a dishwasher, or other things. It's not obviously flushing the toilet, but there's other things that you do to put water into the system that people in that 20% of Worcester maybe didn't know. So we tried to get the report out as quickly as we could around the lake, but if it's 20% of the city expanding, is that what you're trying to say, Gia?
Yeah.
And very valid points, and there has been that discussion as well. That point was brought up at a previous meeting, and it is on part of the corrective action going forward. Will be notifications. How can we strengthen that? Again, the response plan that was put in place back in 2016, 2017. I don't believe there's anything within that involves the reverse 911 or the code red, and certainly have those capabilities now, so we can add to that. I think as far as the physical monitoring and sampling and whatnot that took place, Public Works itself didn't do those things. Sustainability in a different department looked at that, did those samples, and I think that was preferable rather than it being in-house. No, let a third party come in and do some of that sampling. It's a little more unbiased, a little bit better understanding of what's actually happening. And then to your other point, as far as with the various monitoring that's taken place both historically and even this past winter with this event, you've now created a baseline. So I think with that baseline, it also helps a lot of things moving forward, and there will be additional monitoring that continues.
Wonderful. I could add to that as well.
Jackie.
Oh, yeah.
Jackie, hold on.
And just as far as the monitoring that did take place, so the Lakes and Ponds program, which is part of the Department of Sustainability and Resilience, we did begin monitoring for a variety of different parameters after the spill at various portions of the lake, up and down through the ice, and then after that from a kayak. We have put together a preliminary report of all of those results. I have some paper copies here tonight. It will also be available on the Lakes and Ponds website tomorrow. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to address those as well.
Thank you for that. The hard work is
In the engineering study, are you also looking at the gases that are being emitted by the facility? And do you have any kind of devices that monitor the gases and the odors coming from the facility?
Again, last fall, what brought some experts into that station was the complaint of odors. That work has started, it hasn't been completed, but based on whatever it is they find, we will then, develop some kind of a monitoring plan associated with that. So that will, again, be part of the recommendations that are forthcoming with the engineer's report.
So what I'm hearing is that there are no devices monitoring the gases at present, but that could be part of the plan moving forward.
It could be, certainly.
Actually, this gentleman's first. Yeah.
Just a very basic question, if I may. Where and how does rainwater meet with sewer flow? I should have asked this up front, so I could follow the discussion a little bit better, but I'm an engineer and I don't understand how that, or where.
Well, you get rainwater, you get groundwater that will infiltrate within an older system. Your older sewer system may not be completely tight, so as the groundwater comes up or it's adjacent to a lake, you'll get water that will go into those open joints of a gravity system. Likewise, when you have rain out, any rain that may follow and be able to enter into a manhole may get into that system. The biggest problem with Worcester, however, is that in certain areas of the system, when it was originally built 100 plus years ago, those systems between rainwater and stormwater were actually combined. So that within manholes you have both, one side has sewer, one side has stormwater. It was thought of as a cutting edge technology 100 plus years ago. Unfortunately, those systems now mix. So the long-term fix for that is actually a couple $100 million worth of construction to separate those two again. In most of your other areas of the city, in most other communities, you have completely separate systems, so you don't have that issue. And that's one of the things I was referring to as far as how do we remove that extraneous or clean water out of the sanitary system so that we're no longer transporting it, we're no longer pumping it, and we're no longer sending it to a treatment plant to be treated.
That to me seemed like the primary design input into whatever engineering analysis is being done. You can relatively easily design an hydraulic system with known inputs. Population numbers, population predictions. But rainwater? I mean, the 100-year storm doesn't cut it because it happens twice every year. So you've got to work with something. If the infiltration rates are unknown, then how do you get to a design that, I mean, you could do more redundancy, more pumps, but that's not economically feasible.
No, and the infiltration is relatively easier to fix because I can go inside those pipes, mechanically seal the joints. I can go run a liner down those pipes. I can cut out that infiltration. The harder part is when I have a combined system, because now I'm dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars worth of rebuilding two separate systems, or sealing one and rebuilding a second system, which is a significant undertaking.
Is there one section of the city that has more of that design than others?
Yes. There's an older section of the city that, basically, the entire section has combined systems. And part of that is coming in this direction.
That's not affecting this area, though?
Part of that is coming in this direction. Yes.
Okay. Jason?
I just have to build on the engineering aspect of this, right? So we've heard tonight, we're gonna wait for the consultant, and we're gonna wait. I'm really concerned that we're just gonna wait around for everything, and we're not being proactive about this, we have no systems in place. So I wanna know, do we have engineers on the Worcester department that we hire and that we fund to actually hold these consulting firms accountable? Because you can hire a consulting firm and say, hey, pump station broke, go please fix it. They're gonna say, all right, well, we'll just keep charging you and we'll deliver wherever we want, and nobody's gonna hold them accountable. So how do we hold them accountable? How do we actually what deliverables do we have of them? Because I think right now we're talking about a bunch of different things. We're talking about failures and corrective actions, we're talking about system design, growth plans for the entire city and the entire sewer system, we're talking about the backup system, preventative maintenance plans. I've gone to the city council meetings, I've given suggestions. I don't see that we have anything in place right now. I don't know if we have the engineering know-how. That's why I would just say right now, get a second consultant in here and have them go against each other and hold each other accountable, because that's the best thing we're gonna do, unless we have some people that can do it inside.
Okay,
Someone just asked me if people could identify themselves.
Wendy Lovelock, I live in Shrewsbury on the down here. I just have a quick question. You're saying the pump, from what I'm thinking, it has a bypass. You can bypass it right now with some pumps that you have open. Would it make sense, or would it be possible to bypass everything, get in there, have whoever is supposed to be in there checking everything out, so that nothing happens? I mean, I've only lived on Lake 5 years, and every year it happens. So I haven't been here 30 years, I've been here 5 years, and it's like, why does this keep happening? Like, is there a way we can use that bypass it, and get in there and get people in there to look at do a total overhaul?
And that's one of the reasons why it was even thought of originally, and that's why it's there, and that's why it's gonna stay there, is so that we can do that. The way the system's built, it's got 4 unique separate pumps that I can put on 1, I can put on 2, put on 3, put on 4.
But you said I'm sorry, but you
That's
said
okay.
we can do that. So it's an option. So rather than saying we can do that, why don't we say we are gonna do that, or that's our plan? Like, we're not really getting, I hate to say it, I don't feel like we're really getting too many answers. We're getting like that gentleman just said back there, I don't remember your name, but like he said, you said, well, that's a thing we could do, or this, we can get someone in here and talk about this. We need, we as people, I think, wanna know, what is the plan? Like, what is your plan to have, you know what I'm saying?
Just so you know, when we went to organize this meeting, the city did tell us that we will not have a lot of the design plans or those types of things worked out. The main goal was to come here to get your questions and for you to get impact, get input from you. And there were questions about the water quality of the fish. So we know there's going to be a lot of questions here that the city can't answer, but we wanted to start the discussion with you.
But let me at least give you some answers. So in order to figure out what happened to that station, I actually have to take certain components of it and get them working, so that it needs to be working so I can look at it. Is there too much vibration? Is there too many, is there an electrical issue? Is it this, is it that? So, while yes, I could dismantle the whole thing, but it's not gonna tell me what it is, is there a problem with one aspect or a different aspect?
I'm sorry, but my question basically was can you bypass it and then get in there and look and figure it out, or that was my question basically. Can we use that bypass, you shut it down, bypass it, and figure it all out, so it doesn't happen?
That's certainly available to us if the experts that we brought in indicate that we need to shut this down and dismantle it, and like if you will, a plane that crashed, take it apart and then take it somewhere else and put it back together. But at this point, we don't need to do that, not right now.
Okay, but this is.
Maybe it's, was there any attempt to clean it up?
or are there attempts to clean it up, or is it just natural recourse takes its place?
Well, we asked the question, you know, during and thereafter, what is it that we can do? Again, we looked at the experts that deal with the lake. Is there something that can be done? And unfortunately, because of the way it discharged, where it discharged, there wasn't much we could do other than bring those tankers in and physically remove as much from it that we could. That's why we've asked those that are doing the monitoring, monitor, look at it. Is there something, for example, if there was a drop in dissolved oxygen, then what do we need to do? We need to bring in an aerator to bring that oxygen back up. But the answer we were getting was that, no, we can't really do that. You know, we haven't seen or been provided any evidence of something that we can go fix. And it's somewhat unfortunate, but there's not a fix or a remedial action that someone can point to that we're not doing, because we're more than willing and able to do it. But unfortunately, with this type of release, there is nothing, and Jackie or anyone else can chime in, but no one's been able to point some, well, you really can go do this. Haven't found it yet.
Sir?
Yeah. My name's Paul Feeney, I'm an engineer. You've all been very nice with all your answers. It appears to me that we're really very reactive, not proactive. Can we get better at maybe dealing with the spills then, if we can't stop them? Are we doing anything to get 5.7 million gallons of sewage out of the lake? Is anything being done?
Again, that goes to pretty much this gentleman's answer.
No.
And neither the solids that came with the 5.7 million gallons.
Nothing. We can do nothing. There's nothing to do.
Yes, I was just gonna, Mary Jo, not to put you on the spot. Do you know, I'm going to, about the water quality and cleaning up, if there's anything?
I mean, now that it's there, what do we do?
Well, it's not all there because it moved downstream, so I think the idea is to assess and to measure and to see what's there. In terms of products, paper, things that washed up on the shore, in a cove, I think that's something the city could investigate and assess whether there's cleanup that's not DEP type cleanup, it's not hazardous waste. But I think that's probably something that's around while the water left us a month ago. Todd was speaking to the chemical effects or the biological effects of that water. I mean, that's something that the monitoring is aimed at, measuring and observing, and to the extent that there is more monitoring that the city is doing, we appreciate that and would like to get those results. But in terms of what happened on February 6th, that huge slug went downstream.
Down where? It's a lake. It's not, I mean, where's the stream that's taking it away?
Well, eventually, you know, I'm not.
Quinsigamond River and then Blackstone River.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
all right, sorry.
Does Narragansett Bay have an issue then? Because it goes Blackstone, which is very polluted, and Narragansett Bay, which has a cleanup problem right now. Is that part of it? Are we contributing to Narragansett pollution?
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, what's,
The issue here with that Narragansett is the volume. Be more concerned local than the dilution that happens with the entire Blackstone watershed, right? So all the way down to Narragansett and what's going on there. But I mean, not good, but not a measurable impact that far away. You're gonna see something look closer and fix closer.
Is everything assumptions though? I mean, is anyone actually seeing, evidence that it's going that way, or we just, yeah, I guess it's going that way.
Okay, I have one quick question. For fish, people who fish, and I may have missed this, it's safe to eat the fish.
Yeah, so we talked about Department of Public Health recommendations, pay attention to the guidelines, but the trout that are gonna win in the next month are exempt from the public health advisories. The trout are fine to eat.
Gary Ostrov, very close to your resident on the lake. I told Jackie that the work that you've done doing the analyses, it's pretty clear that the coliform levels by the incident are still very high. And they're going down, but is it safe to swim in that lake today?
Yeah, so I could talk about all the results if you want. I could give you a quick summary of what we did. So as the event was occurring, and DPW was really great about communicating to the other departments what was going on, and we were able to come up with a monitoring plan. We got in touch with Fish and Wildlife. We monitor 6 months a year. We go out to Lake Quinsigamond twice a month, and we collect a lot of different parameters. And you can see the results of all of that on the Lakes and Ponds website. We have an annual State of the Lakes and talk about it all there. So we don't normally measure during the winter time. So there were some logistical challenges that are involved with that, not the least of which was the ice cover, right? We have warmer sewer water going in. What does that mean? So there was a slight delay before we got out there. Our first day of measuring was the 10th. So when we were going out there, we were looking at a few different things. We know that raw sewage has bacteria. Obviously, bacteria is the thing we're most worried about when it comes to human public health, right? We don't want to be in touch with bacteria because it's going to make us sick. And in fact, the state has some very strict mandates about what can be considered recreational thresholds for contact. And that's, when this all started, the assumption was, there's a lot there, we're closing the lake. We didn't take a single sample, we just closed it. Everything down south of Route 9. After that, the Department of Inspectional Services began doing testing on a daily basis. I think beginning on the 9th. And all of the results are available in this report. So on the 9th, we got the first result back from them. That was before we even got out there. And for bacteria, we saw that the level was 300 CFUs, which sounds like a high number, but the threshold for recreational contact is 235. So actually, it's not too far above the recreational threshold. We began to see the numbers continuing to rise after that, though. We originally thought, okay, it's going to die. Bacteria die really quickly outside of a warm-blooded creature. Between the water, between the sun, it just doesn't live very long. And so when we saw it go down to 300 that first day, we were like, all right, we are going to be able to lift this advisory really soon. Not saying there aren't other things in the lake, but as far as bacteria, that's not going to live very long. The levels continued to go up after that. So that was really odd because there was no more input into the lake. What eventually happened was that we did a little investigation upstream of the outfall that was right there, and we did find that there was a sewer clog. And so once we remediated that, the levels came down, and we were able to lift the advisory. The lake no longer has an advisory on it. As of the 24th of February, the lake is good. The Lakes and Ponds program did monitoring all around inside of the lake, and we were looking not just at bacteria, how far did it get into the lake, right? We knew it was high right there, but did it make it to the middle? Were ice anglers going to be affected? We also wanted to look at other things that maybe wouldn't affect the ice anglers, but maybe they would affect the fish. Maybe it would affect the other wildlife. So we were looking at things like the dissolved oxygen and the things that would cause the dissolved oxygen to be high. We knew that it was probably going to be high because of how cold the water was, but what about when the water warms up? The things that cause the dissolved oxygen to plummet are the organic inputs. So those are the solids. And how do we measure those? We look for nutrients. Those are the things that are actually feeding the organism. Nitrogen, phosphorus. All the things that sound great in your garden are also great for all the bacteria and other things in the lake. So we went out there and we measured for nitrogen, phosphorus. We measured for the bacteria as well, just to see how far it got. And we also measured for a lot of those other compounds that you would be worried about going down the drain, things that you might find at a medical facility. We looked at metals, we looked at volatile organic compounds. And so what we found there, we did this, a little upstream and a few places in front of the pumping station and then further downstream as well, because we know that there is this slight flow going south. And so what we found was the oxygen levels were not too affected, but of course, like we know, it's cold, and so we wouldn't necessarily expect that to happen right away. We were looking at those nutrients. The nutrient levels were slightly elevated, but they weren't terribly elevated. This is something that we're going to want to keep an eye on as the weather warms up to see if there is a response, and we're going to continue to monitor to see if that happens. E. coli levels, they never surpassed the threshold in the middle of the lake. The highest number we got was like 160 70 in the middle of the lake. So by the 11th, which was the first day that we tested, the bacteria in the middle of the lake out here were dead. They were not going to be a problem. Those other compounds, we found some metals, but they were all the metals that you would find in the geology. So we have a little arsenic, I think there's a little bit of copper, maybe a little zinc as well. So those are things you find in the natural water already. So what am I trying to say by all that? I'm not saying that those things didn't enter the water, because they probably did. There were nutrients in the water, there was bacteria in the water. The nutrients, they were there, they were measurable, they're probably getting diluted in this large volume of water. All those other compounds, the metals, the other volatile organics, they're there in the sewage, but in very low numbers to begin with, and then when they come into the lake, they're diluted even more, so that they're not necessarily even detectable with the instrumentation that we have. So we're going to continue monitoring to see if there are impacts to the fish as it continues, but right now we're not seeing really any effect on what we think anything that will be really affecting the fish right now. And the bacteria levels are okay.
What can we expect this summer?
So that's what we're going to be checking out. So like, as we mentioned, this like flow and the fact that it's the phosphorus numbers and the nitrogen numbers are kind of returning to that level that we typically see in the lake. It's really just, if it returns to that level before it warms up, then maybe we're fine. If it warms up and there's still high levels there, then maybe that will trigger some kind of an event. We're not sure yet. We haven't, this is unprecedented. This amount of sewage is unprecedented in the lake.
How far south or downstream do you test?
We went as far down as Lake Park. Lake Park, so yeah.
Do you have any data for like Flint Pond where they actually look at?
I think it's being traced.
Yeah, so we haven't tested on Flint Pond yet, but it is something that we would consider testing as it warms up if we see evidence. But as I mentioned, like we're seeing low numbers here, we're guessing it's even more diluted by the time it gets down to Flint Pond. But we do measure for other things in Flint Pond with our volunteer monitoring team, a cyanobacteria monitoring team that you could be trained as a community scientist to join. And they will also be helping to provide some data this summer. Is someone taking questions?
Okay, this gentleman first, then Peter.
Okay.
When you're measuring those samples, are those in dissolved water, or are you measuring the sludge at the bottom? Because lead could be in there, lead is heavier than water, lead's gonna sink out.
Right, that's a good point. So we are measuring what is in the water column. So what is actively interacting with the water and the fish, and what would be, yeah.
So not the sludge.
So we are not measuring the sludge, we are not able to get to the sludge. So yes,
So
it could be there. But as of now, it's not measurable in the water column.
Okay. And then a proxy for having those organisms that feed on the fecal bacteria, are those active during the wintertime, or are they more active during the summertime?
They're much more active in the summertime, which is why we're gonna continue to.
Okay, so our measurements could be not very accurate.
Oh no, so the dissolved oxygen is a proxy for the metabolic activity. The nutrients will not be affected by the temperature measurements.
It just seems deceiving though when we have it say, oh well, there's not much activity, the phosphorus and nitrogen is fine, yeah, there's no lead in the water, it's fine, there's no mercury in the water, but I think there could be stuff other places. I just don't know if we know how to do it. I think you're doing a great job measuring everything. I just don't know if we know how to measure everything yet.
Yes, which is why we're in touch with Fish and Wildlife for guidance on this as well. And it's definitely an unprecedented thing, and we're working really hard to create those procedures so that, yeah, in the future that we can do an even better job. But yeah, we're working with what we have right now.
No, thank you, appreciate your great job.
Yeah.
Peter?
So, Jacqueline, just to kind of answer your question, I know we can't determine what's in the sediment when it goes down, what is the sludge, but what does it turn to? What does the stuff turn to when it gets down to the bottom? The dangerous part is the E. coli, and so when it gets down there, does that all go away? Does it become earth, or part of the bottom? Does it stay as a feces? What happens to it when it gets down there?
So those are great questions, and I can't necessarily answer all of those because we haven't taken those samples. As far as solids, a lot of what entered here, there wasn't much as far as solids. It's not like there were large chunks going into the lake at this point. It was pretty turbid water. As far as like what does settle out, it's hard to know on Lake Quinsigamond. It's a very dynamic lake, so there are a lot of oxygen and thermal mixing that happens, and so there are a lot of times during the winter time or during the summer times when it's anoxic down there, and you wouldn't expect any metabolic activity to be occurring at that depth. Right now, it's also very cold, so it's hard to know.
Great, so there's not a little minefield going on now, if you're walking around with this stuff. So, the other question I have is that how often does the lake, the water body, actually turn over where it's basically different water than it is? You know, right now it's this water, and how long would it be before it's completely different water and that water's gone, you know, the water that's there today is gone somewhere else?
So in Lake Quinsigamond, we have a really high flushing rate. In about 6 months, all the water has been replaced.
So in 6 months, the water that's here now will not be the water that's there?
Yeah.
Yes, so that'll all be gone?
Yes.
So by the summertime, we should be safe to swim?
As of right now, with every test.
Because of this spill?
With this situation, you're fine tomorrow.
Okay.
Because all the things, at least with the tests that we currently use to determine if water is safe, those tests are telling us we're okay.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Gentleman, do you have a question still, sir? No. All right, any other questions? Commissioner.
Great. Garen Sagay, and on the Shrewsbury side of the event. So DPW Commissioner, you mentioned a study, it sounds like you had a number of a couple $100 million to separate the flows. Was that, what was that study? What was that number based on?
The city over the years has done an awful lot of studies and come up with a game plan with regards to separating those flows. There's been, last summer we saw an awful lot of flooding in the Green Island neighborhood and other areas, which is leading us to look at the entire drainage area. There was also a holistic view looked at with regards to the city as a whole and its water resources. Not only the lakes, the ponds, but also the drainage, the tributaries, and the sewer system. That's known as the integrated plan. That integrated plan calls for roughly $600 million worth of improvements over the course of 50 years to remove the infiltration inflow, to upgrade certain areas of the sewer system, to do a drainage master plan, to upgrade some of that drainage so that we alleviate some of the flooding problems, some of the problems we have, and the flow that we're treating, which is mostly clean water in the wet season. So the II study with a couple $100 million in separating that area was just one component of that plan. That whole plan is online. Again, it's called the integrated plan. So for those that are interested, you can go see what's there. You'll hear more and more about the various projects the city is doing, and a lot of the resources that are coming through with the infrastructure program, as well as about $20 million from the ARPA funding is going to some of those drainage improvements, and that's already in the works as far as the design of some of that work.
So how does this problematic pumping station fit into that integrated plan?
The problematic pumping station is separate and above and beyond that integrated plan.
So I guess my ultimate question would be, if you finish that integrated plan, in a hypothetical world, in a couple of years, would that reduce our problem?
Yes, because you would be looking at reducing the amount of flow and removing that extraneous flow and actually improving your drainage systems, improving the quality of water that the lake is receiving. All of those things are associated with that integrated plan.
So the bottom line is, it's all about the money.
Yes and no. I mean, with regards to the pumping station and what is needed to fix it, change it, do whatever, that's not about the money. As far as the system as a whole, with the 600 million, it's all about the money, because that money is, until the infrastructure bill came along, that money was all basically going to be paid out of the pocket of the ratepayers. So that was designed to take 50 years, because it was also looked at from the economic point of view and the ratepayer point of view, what can the city afford to do and how fast can we do it?
Are the engineers that we're using now, that are going to be advising you, were they advising the city of Worcester, the same engineers when the pumps were being built? Or are these engineers completely different?
These engineers are completely different. And when we start, again, I'll reiterate, when we started looking at what's the matter with the station, what are the odors, are there things with that station, at that decision, that was the decision point. I don't want to hear from those that were involved. I want a fresh set of eyes, fresh set of ears. Tell me what's going on here.
I don't know about the engineers, but our bridge is beautiful. The engineers that did that did a really good job on budget, did a great job on that bridge. Did they do anything about the pump system? I don't know. Those guys did a great job on that.
It's a beautiful bridge. I can't say it's not.
No, but that's the same kind of people.
Well, and we are certainly striving to do just that.
Any other questions?
Yes, Linda Sarkisian, I live on the south, I live on a very narrow cove that I haven't noticed anything flowing through yet. But my question is about the capacity. Earlier, you said that Worcester has the sewer capacity for all that your, all of the UMass extra buildings, the biotechnology parks, and so forth. But would you ever be considering putting another pumping station to take some away from Lake Ave? Or a moratorium on connections if this were to continue?
Well, as I indicated, when the analysis is complete and when they give forward a report, I'm hopeful that within that report will be a number of options, such as, can we reduce the flows here? Can we do something? Should we move the station? Whatever they come up with, our expectation is that will be part of that report. And then what are the options? And at which point, that would be the point that we would bring that information back to the public, so we can show you not only what we found, what we're looking at, as well as what we're considering going forward for the ultimate fix.
And can I follow up with a question on UMass? Do they have any pumping stations of their own, or that whole facility goes down to the Lake Ave pump station?
I'm not aware that they have any pumping facilities to move it in any other direction.
Would that be feasible, something that could be done?
Again, I'm going to
Okay.
wait till the report comes out.
Thank you.
More questions?
Sorry, just the video that I took showing that outfall pipe, the same pipe that goes right down Route 9, was coming out with such force. I mean, I don't think the engineers really got that pipe right. Are you guys gonna also study that as well?
And I guess the video you're talking about, when was the video taken?
Yeah, I do a lot of video posting on the Lake Quinsigamond Association site, and because anybody here in this building can do it. If you see water coming out of a pipe, take the video, put it up, let everybody see it. But that was so egregious, the force that comes out. And that berm is designed to reduce any amount of force that gravity takes the water downhill. It's supposed to remediate the force. But you could probably actually take a motorboat, point it straight in to the current, and probably deduce that the current's probably about 7 knots. It comes up that powerfully. I can't fathom that the engineers got that completely right. So if that's the case, and that's just one pipe of this antiquated system that's not working correctly, boy, if you have elevated rainfalls in that pipe is also connected with sewage? I mean,
And let me be clear, when I say there's a combined system, the combined system isn't on the clean water side, any combining ends up on the wastewater side. So that the combined system isn't discharging contaminated water, if you will, to the lake. When the systems combine, the relief of that combined system is into the sewer system, which then we pump, we treat, we send to the upper Blackstone. With regards to your original question and the drainage outfall pipe, and is that designed with that discharge and that velocity, I'm going to tell you that when that pipe was designed, that's probably exactly what it was done. I don't know of any study or any degradation that's being done to the lake at that location because there's that level of a discharge from the stormwater. If there was or is such a report, there are velocity dissipators that could be used to slow that down if that was needed or the case. But again, that's not what we're looking at right now. That's not the urgency of the item that we're looking at. But that may be when we get into, again, that holistic view of all of the stormwater and we start looking at some of those discharges, maybe there is something else we need to do.
thank you.
Any questions?
Is there anything we can do to help get funding to fix this? What's the next steps for us?
Again, at this point, the direction that I've been given from the city manager is not about we have to go get funding. The question was, how much do you need to fix it? So at this point, I'm not saying that I need to form a parade and a march to get funding. We don't. I think there's resources that will step to the table once the options are provided with a path forward. And again, I would encourage you all to stay tuned looking for that path forward, because I think collectively we all want the same thing, and that is a system that works, a system that's relatively foolproof, so we can enjoy the water resource that we have. From the city point of view, what we really want to do is we have services that we need to provide, we have systems in place that we need to maintain, and yet at the same time we want to be good stewards and with branches of the city aimed at making sure that we are taking care of our environmental resources. We're hoping for, that's the direction we need.
Yeah, Michael Piker, Vice Chair of the Commission. If we had 6 million gallons of COVID-laden sewage coming into the lake, and again, part of that was UMass, where the sickest people with COVID would go, and it would get flushed down the toilet, never mind biotechnology. If the city and the state's sitting on like $100 million of COVID relief money, can't we find a way to have that, used to rectify this problem? And there's millions of dollars that the Fed has given to cities and the state, hundreds of millions for COVID relief. It would help.
Any other questions? All right, so as far as the COVID money, the state has opera funding. Basically, the legislature had $2.5 billion last year. That went to the administration. So we increased funding for different line items. It could have been different. We could have increased more funding for homelessness, other different policy areas. So the administration actually has the money, and they are developing grant programs or funding sources for different areas. Some has to do with climate change, resiliency, which this maybe could fall into. The federal government also just sent, I think we all saw the president signed that, the Build Back Better America. Well, we're slated to get roughly about $12 billion from that. The administration so Baker administration will determine, will have to follow the guidelines that is set by the federal government. So we haven't seen that yet. So there could be grant programs or funding sources that currently exist, but until the city determines what infrastructure changes they have to do and what grant programs they could fall under, the question of funding is really going to be determined has to wait until we find out what their remedial actions are going to be. So hopefully that answer, I know it's not the answer you want, but it is a part of the process. So before we end this meeting, I'm just gonna say, Mary Jude, do you have anything else from DEP standpoint?
Thank you again, and Mr. Fisher, I look forward to talking.
Oh, okay, Steve?
Can I just suggest, after Commissioner Fink gets some answers, the end of April, whenever that is, either he's in contact with you or Candy.
Okay, actually,
do this again.
Oh, I was just gonna say the same thing. If we can do we're all on the same page here. Before we get to that, Todd, anything else from Fish and Wildlife?
Cool, thank you all.
Jackie from all the lakes and,
Just that report, will be on the website tomorrow, if you are interested, I didn't bring it up to everyone, sorry.
So basically I'm gonna suggest that we wait for the city with their consultants to have some more definitive answers. And then when that takes place, that we do just for your suggestion, that we may try to actually get back together again and have another meeting to discuss what's being looked at and what.
And hopefully that'll be sometime in May, and we can come back with what we have at that point. It may not be at all, but it'll at least be hopefully a good piece. The other thing that I know Council Russell and I, and I'm not trying to speak for my colleague over here, but we can ask the city any reports in the meantime that we receive to put them on the city website. So at least that way there you can see any updates that are coming along at that point too.
All right, I'm just being told the Lake Quinsigamond Watershed Association is having a meeting March 23rd. Where's that gonna be?
Here.
Oh, here at 7 o'clock, so if anyone wants to come down to that meeting, I guess for more information. But I wanna thank you all for coming out tonight. If I could just actually get a thank you from everyone for DEP, Fish and Wildlife, and Jackie. Because after Steve reached out and we decided on this, they, no hesitation coming out here and speaking and meeting with everyone. So again, thank you all for coming, and we'll try to follow up with some more information when we get it.